There's a lot happening around the Buffalo Bills right now, and some of it has me genuinely leaning forward in my chair because this is exactly the time of year when one roster decision can completely reshape the picture heading into the season. Behind the scenes, this front office is quietly telling us who they trust, who they don't, and who still has one more shot to prove they belong. And the more I look at what just happened, the more I think there's a bigger story here than most people realize. So stick with me, Bills Mafia, because we need to talk about what Buffalo just did, why they did it, and what it could mean for this team when the games start counting for real. Before we dive in, I'm Sam, this is Bills Nation Update, and if you're a real Bills fan, do me a favor and hit that like button. We're a brand new channel building this community from scratch, and our very first goal is just 5,000 subscribers. I only want the real ones here, though, the fans who still believe deep down that this is finally the year Buffalo gets to the Super Bowl. If that's you, welcome to the family. Let's get into it. Let's start with the move that genuinely surprised me. Buffalo has re-signed safety Wandale Owens, and the timing here is what makes this so fascinating. This isn't a case of a guy sitting around unemployed and Buffalo taking pity on him. Owens was released by the Bills on July 31st. Full stop. Gone. Off the roster. And instead of fading into NFL obscurity like so many undrafted guys do, he did something that turned heads. He got workouts with 4 different teams around the league. 4 other franchises watched this kid, evaluated him, and clearly saw something worth investigating. And then, after all of that interest, after all those other locker rooms got a look at him, he's right back in Buffalo. Think about what that actually means. Mike Garafolo of NFL Network was the one who broke the news that the Bills brought Owens back into the fold, and when you really sit with it, it raises a fascinating question. What did Buffalo see in this kid that made them say, you know what, we need to take another look? Because teams don't usually go out of their way to bring back a player they just cut loose, especially not when he's already generating buzz elsewhere. My gut tells me the answer is simple. Opportunity. The Bills know exactly what they're getting. They know the flaws, they know the upside, and they clearly believe the upside is worth the second look. Here's the thing about Owens. He was never a golden boy prospect who walked into the league with a guaranteed roster spot. He signed with Buffalo as an undrafted free agent back in 2025 and had to fight for every single rep. Then, just when things were rolling, an undisclosed injury landed him on injured reserve and ended his season before it really got started. The Bills waived him with an injury designation, and that looked like it might be the end of the story. But now, apparently healthy again, Owens gets a shot at Chapter 2. And what makes this whole situation even juicier is that Buffalo knew. They absolutely knew other teams were circling. 4 different organizations brought this guy in for workouts after the Bills let him go. That is not a nobody wanted him situation. That is a we might be sleeping on a diamond in the rough situation. There was real interest around the league, real evaluation happening, and Buffalo still decided the smartest move was to bring him back into their own building and let him compete in training camp. So let's talk about where this kid actually comes from. Because his college tape tells you exactly why teams keep circling back to him. Owens spent his first 3 years at Yale, and during that stretch he appeared in 29 games, racking up 165 tackles, 18 passes defended, and an interception. That is not a guy who was just filling a roster spot in the Ivy League. He was a first-team All-Ivy selection in each of his final 2 seasons there. Then in 2024, he transferred to New Hampshire for his final 13 games and kept right on producing. 111 tackles, 2 pass breakups, and another interception. So when you step back and look at the full body of work, this is a player who has consistently shown he can find the football, make plays sideline to sideline, and contribute in multiple ways on the back end of a defense. The question was never whether Wandale Owens could ball out at the college level. He clearly could. The real question, the one that actually matters now, is whether that production translates to Sundays in the NFL. and Buffalo just handed him another chance to answer it. Now, I want to keep this in perspective because I don't want anyone in the comments thinking Owens just locked up a roster spot. He absolutely did not. Bringing him back does not guarantee him anything close to a final roster spot. This is an uphill battle, plain and simple. Training camp is where the real evaluation happens, and Owens has to make an impression fast. The Bills only have so many roster spots, and every single safety in that building is scrapping for one of them. But here's the part of this story that I genuinely love. Owens now gets to walk back into that building with a chip on his shoulder the size of Highmark Stadium. He got cut. 4 different teams brought him in and said, "Let's see what you've got." And then his original team called him back and said, "Come home, we want another look." That's not just a second chance, that's a redemption arc waiting to happen. For a player like this, one strong camp could completely flip the script. Now let's pivot to the other half of this roster shakeup, because Buffalo also made a pretty significant move at linebacker, and this one has a much colder, more business-like feel to it. Just hours before their very first preseason game, the Bills released veteran linebacker Otis Reese IV. And yeah, that timing matters. This wasn't some slow burn decision made over weeks of evaluation. Buffalo had signed Reese barely a week earlier, right after the New England Patriots let him go over the summer. He came in as a late addition to the 90-man roster, and the expectation was that he'd compete for a reserve linebacker role while also chipping in on special teams, which is usually a path for guys trying to carve out a career. Instead, his time in Buffalo is already finished, and here's a wrinkle that makes this feel even more like déjà vu. This isn't even the first time Reese and the Bills have crossed paths. He actually spent part of the 2025 season on Buffalo's practice squad, but he never got the call up to the active roster. The Bills released him back in October, and now, after bringing him back for a second look this summer, they've moved on from him yet again. 2 strikes with the same franchise. That's rough. For Otis Reese IV, this is just the latest chapter in what has honestly been a pretty nomadic NFL journey. He entered the league in 2023 as an undrafted rookie free agent with the Tennessee Titans. And over 2 seasons there, he appeared in 20 games with 5 starts, building a reputation as a versatile piece who could contribute heavily on special teams. Across that NFL career, he tallied 38 tackles and 1 interception. Solid, unspectacular, exactly the profile of a depth guy trying to hang on. According to Sports Illustrated's Jeremy Brenner, Reese actually got a real shot to compete for a starting job on Tennessee's defense during a training camp at one point, but the Titans ultimately leaned towards Cedric Gray and James Williams Sr., who were ahead of him on the depth chart, and that eventually cost Reese his roster spot there too. Now he's back on the open market, looking for his next opportunity wherever that ends up being. But here's where this story gets genuinely interesting for Bills fans, because even though Buffalo just cut Reese loose, linebacker is still one of the thinner spots on this roster. Why? Because the Bills lost a steady, reliable starter when Matt Milano hit free agency this offseason. So while Buffalo has clearly decided Otis Reese IV isn't the answer right now, that does not mean the linebacker room is settled. Far from it. This is a position group worth watching extremely closely as the preseason rolls on. And there's already a name floating around that has Bills Mafia buzzing. Bleacher Report's Christopher Knox suggested that Buffalo could potentially bring back a familiar face, former Bills linebacker Tyrell Dodson, through a trade with the Miami Dolphins. Now, to be crystal clear, this is speculation, not a done deal, not a rumor with legs yet, just an interesting theory. But the reasoning behind it is worth breaking down. Miami has been going through a massive roster rebuild this offseason, and according to Knox, their logical trade chips are pretty limited right now, which could make Dodson an intriguing trade candidate for a team looking for a proven veteran. And Dodson's numbers back up the hype. He started all 16 games last season and put together a genuinely massive statistical year, racking up 129 tackles, 5 sacks, and 10 tackles for loss. That's not a scrub. That's a productive, 3-down NFL linebacker. Here's what makes the idea even juicier from a roster-building standpoint. Dodson is entering the final year of his contract and carries a cap hit of just $3.7 million. For a Buffalo team that's tight against the salary cap, that number is incredibly appealing. Knox's basic argument is that if Miami is already planning to move on from Dodson after this season anyway, trading him now during preseason could be their best way to actually get value back for him instead of losing him for nothing in free agency next year. And for Buffalo, if this team decides it genuinely needs more experience and juice at linebacker, Tyrell Dodson is about as familiar an option as it gets. This is a guy Bills fans already know, already trust, already watched make plays in that uniform. I completely understand why this rumor has people talking. But at the same time, I want to be responsible here. I don't want us running ahead and acting like this trade is already happening. It isn't. Not yet, anyway. The confirmed, real news right now is simple. Buffalo released Otis Reese IV, while in the same breath, bringing Wandale Owens back into the building after he had already worked out for 4 other franchises. On the surface, these two moves might look completely unrelated, but dig a little deeper, and they tell the exact same story about where this organization's head is at right now. They're evaluating. They're experimenting. They're trying to figure out piece by piece exactly which players can actually help them win when the lights come on in September. And honestly, this is exactly why preseason matters so much more than casual fans want to admit. For a player like Wandale Owens, these practices and preseason snaps can be everything. One electric performance can completely change the way a coaching staff views a guy. One rough stretch can put him right back on the outside looking in. And for Buffalo as an organization, every single roster decision carries weight right now, because this is not a team that has the luxury of entering the season with obvious, glaring holes. The expectations in Buffalo are enormous, and everybody watching knows it. Bills Mafia isn't interested in another season where the team is simply good enough to sneak into the playoffs. We've lived that story on repeat. We want more. We want this roster built well enough, deep enough, and tough enough to still be standing in January and honestly in February too. That's exactly why decisions at positions like safety and linebacker matter so much right now. You need depth. You need players ready to step up the second an injury hits. You need reliable bodies on special teams. You need young guys who can actually develop into real contributors. And you need the front office to make the right calls now, before the regular season ruthlessly exposes every single weakness for the entire world to see. That's why I'm genuinely excited to watch what Wandale Owens does with this second opportunity. He's not guaranteed a single thing. He's not walking into that building as a household name with a locked roster spot. But he's already shown enough on the field for 4 different NFL teams to want a closer look after Buffalo cut him loose, and now the Bills themselves have decided they're not done evaluating him either. That matters. That means something. At the same time, the release of Otis Reese IV is a blunt reminder that absolutely nothing is guaranteed on this roster no matter your resume. He had NFL experience. He had a prior connection to this franchise. He had legitimate versatility as a special teams contributor. And Buffalo still decided to move on before even playing a single preseason snap. That's the cold, unglamorous reality of this business. The Bills are chasing the best possible combination of talent, scheme fit, versatility, health, and long-term upside, and sometimes that means opening a door for one guy while slamming it shut on another, all in the very same afternoon. For Wandale Owens, that door just swung wide open again. For Otis Reese IV, it just closed. And for the rest of us in Bills Mafia, the bigger question now is what Buffalo actually does next. Because if linebacker really is one of the thinner units on this defense, and after losing Matt Milano, it sure looks that way, the front office cannot just cross its fingers and hope things sort themselves out on their own. Maybe the answer is already sitting on this roster somewhere. Maybe a guy like Wandale Owens ends up surprising everybody at safety. Maybe a young linebacker we haven't even talked about yet steps up and forces his way onto the field. Or maybe, just maybe, Buffalo looks outside the building entirely and makes a real run at a name like Tyrell Dodson. That's exactly what makes the next few weeks of this preseason so important to watch. We are genuinely going to learn a lot about this football team, and I don't think we should judge any single one of these moves in isolation. Buffalo isn't just trying to survive a long, grinding NFL season. They're trying to build something built to win a championship. That is the standard. That is the pressure this front office is operating under every single day. And that's exactly why every single one of these roster battles, no matter how small they seem in August, genuinely matters. So when I step back and look at everything that just happened, here's what I see. I see a franchise still actively searching for answers. I see an organization giving Wandale Owens a real second opportunity because they clearly believe there's something worth developing in him. I see Buffalo cutting ties with Otis Reese IV because deep down, they just weren't convinced he was the right piece for this roster right now. And I see a linebacker position that absolutely still deserves our attention going forward. Especially with Matt Milano no longer in the picture and Tyrell Dodson's name now floating around the rumor mill. Nothing here is settled, not even close. And honestly, that's exactly what makes this stretch of the calendar so exciting. We're close enough to real football that every single decision starts to feel important, but there's still just enough time left for somebody, anybody, to completely change the entire conversation before week 1 even arrives. That's what I'm hoping happens. I want somebody on this roster to step up in a big way. I want this team to surprise us. And more than anything, I want the Buffalo Bills to look back at these preseason decisions months from now and know without a doubt that they made the right calls. Because Bills Mafia has waited long enough for this. We don't want another season defined by high expectations that fell short. We want this team to finally take that last step. We want January football to mean something real again. We want February football to mean absolutely everything. And eventually, we want that Lombardi trophy right here in Buffalo where it belongs. So let me know what you think down in the comments, Bills Mafia. Do you like the decision to bring Wandale Owens back after 4 other teams worked him out? Do you think he's got a real shot at making this final roster? And what should Buffalo actually do about that linebacker room after cutting Otis Reese IV? Would you want to see the Bills make a real move for Tyrell Dodson? I genuinely want to hear what you think, because this is Bills Nation Update, and this channel is still just getting off the ground. If you're one of the real ones, if you truly believe the Buffalo Bills can finally get over the hump and reach that Super Bowl, then go ahead and subscribe and help us build this community all the way to our first 5,000 subscribers. Hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep this Bills conversation going together. Bills Mafia, from the very beginning. Let's see exactly where this team takes us, and hopefully, by the time this season is over, we're still talking about the Buffalo Bills, except this time, we're talking about them with a Lombardi trophy sitting right there in the room with us.